one day, one day, one day, one day.
If we can now say that we're sorry to the people from this land, they cry, they cry.
Since the Stolen Generations issue hit the headlines, we've been haunted by the knowledge that Australian governments forcibly removed Aboriginal children from their families over several generations. Many of us wept openly when we read of the children's experiences, and we asked, why did this happen? Who did it, and by what authority? And what happened to the children and their families?
The children were stolen now.
The story begins in the earliest days of colonisation. Not content to take our land, the colonists also wanted our children. In 1833, a high-ranking officer wrote to his superiors in London,
"It is my present intention to retain the boy in confinement, and by kind treatment I am in hopes, from his tender age, he may be accustomed to civilized habits."
Small mission schools were set up to teach our children to become useful servants. Their teachers said they were equal to any children. But when they began to sicken and die, we took them back to the safety of the bush. Some employers took our children by force. The children were not paid and were often cruelly treated. Children who were taken could not learn about their culture and their rights to the land. In this way, taking our children was part of the colonial process of taking our land. By the end of last century, the colonists believe our race was dying out. A politician told the Western Australian Parliament in 1905,
These children of white men must not be left in camps with their black mothers, where they will learn laziness and vice and grow to be a disgrace and menace to our society. They must be put in missions to learn to become humble labourers and domestic servants. It is maudlin sentiment to worry about the mothers, as they forget the children in 24 hours and as a rule are glad to be rid of them.
We refuse to let our children go. One father wrote to the Chief Protector of Aborigines in 1902.
I am afraid that my wife will commit suicide if the boy is not back soon, for she is good for nothing, only cry day and night. I have as much love for my dear wife and children as you have for yours. So if you have any feeling at all, please send the boy back.
The government would not listen to us and set out to take our children, especially the so-called half-caste ones, by force of law. In 1905, the WA Parliament passed special laws which took away our control over our children. The Chief Protector of Aborigines was now their legal guardian. Police officers could come into our homes, take our children, and send them to institutions. It was well known that institutions produced institutionalized young people who had difficulty fitting into society. The government did not treat other families like this. Parents' rights were sacred, and children grew up with all the benefits of being Australian: a home, a family, a proper education, good health, a job, and pride in their inheritance. Even the most neglected and unloved child could only be taken away with proper approval from the court. We will never understand why our families were treated differently. We were told it was for our children's own good. Chief Protector Neville explained,
If we're going to fit and train such children for the future, they cannot be left as they are. I want to teach them right from wrong. How are they to survive in the absence of teaching?
some children may have needed to be rescued, just like some white children. But we were treated as if all our children were neglected and unloved, as if we could not bring them up and teach them how to work and lead a good life. We had to live in makeshift camps around towns and on farms, stations and missions, but we were battling hard to support our children. Why didn't they help us to stay together like they helped other Australian families? There were other reasons for taking our children. The lighter children were a reminder of abuses of our women that most Australians preferred to forget. There was no place for coloured people in a white Australia. We were to be hidden away and prevented from increasing in numbers. A correspondent wrote in the Bulletin magazine in 1901.
If Australia is to be a country fit for our children and their children to live in, we must keep the breed pure. The half-caste usually inherits the vices of both races and the virtues of neither. Do you want Australia to become a community of mongrels?
In the 1930s, the government's new policy of biological absorption promised to get rid of the half-caste problem altogether. We were told the black must go white. Over several generations of state-arranged marriages, Aboriginal skin colour and features would be bred out. In 1937, this genocidal policy was endorsed by all Australian governments. What could we do to stop them taking our children? The Aborigines Act controlled every aspect of our lives. We didn't even have the vote. We looked after each other. Grannies and aunties were there to help, and some of our bosses wrote letters of support. Some parents argued they didn't come under the Act and the department couldn't take their children. A few tried to take the matter to court. In 1928, members of the Native Union begged politicians to change the system.
We are prisoners in our own country. Any police officer can come along and take our children at any time, and we cannot object, or we are committing an offence. In many cases, death alone ends our term of duress.
All we could do when the police came was to hide our children. Roll them up in swags and sit on them. Coat them with boot polish or charcoal so they look darker, or send them to hide in the bush. Some families went on the run. If we physically resisted the police, we could end up in jail. A mother told the Moseley Royal Commission in Perth in 1934. The children were hanging around their father screaming, and I rushed off to see if I could get help. But the policeman caught me and dragged me back. Our children were taken away under police escort. In the north, they often had to walk with police controls of chained prisoners. Some were sent by boat away to institutions in the south. Our children grew up with strangers. They were taught to look down on the ways of their own people. They were given new names and told their parents were dead or didn't care for them. They were meant to never see their families again. In 1949, the Commissioner of Native Affairs wrote,
I am reluctant to return girls to camps after they have been mission trained. I fully understand that the mothers of these girls love their children as much, if not more than white people do, but it would be a regressive step.
We can never know exactly how many of our children were taken, but the West Australian government admitted to the National Inquiry into the Stolen Generations in 1996 that none of our families escaped the effects of forcible removal.
Over the years, some 50 government and mission institutions provided care for Aboriginal children, even though they were such a small percentage of a state's population. A few institutions took in only children, but most cared for sick, elderly and unemployed adults as well. The white staff lived in separate quarters close to the children's dormitories. Some distance away, and often fenced off from the main area, was the adults' camp. Limited funding and resources meant poor standards of care, education and training. Staff were often untrained and overworked. There was no regular inspection system to ensure proper standards of care. This left the children open to physical and sexual abuse. The children's days were governed by rigid regimes, strict discipline and unending chores. Their diet was porridge, tea, bread and a little meat. It is little wonder they were often hungry and in poor health. There was no routine medical or dental care. When children turned 14, they were sent out to work as labourers and domestic servants under the supervision of the Aborigines Department. They were often lonely and poorly treated. For many, the institutions were the only homes they knew. They developed strong attachments to these places, to the other children, the adults in the camp and some of the staff. Many young adults found it impossible to survive on the outside, and they returned to live out their days there.